In the late noughties, toy company Bif Bang Pow experimented with various lines of 8-inch action figures that were inspired by the Mego style of action figure. And during this time, they acquired a number of different licenses. Amongst them we had Doctor Who, Penny Dreadful, and Battlestar Galactica. And interestingly, the Battlestar Galactica line was based on the original TV show from 1978. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the original show only ran for one season. It was later rebooted or continued as Battlestar Galactica 1980, but sadly, this show didn't fare much better. In fact, it only ran for 10 episodes. And the show would largely be forgotten until the early noughties, when it was of course reimagined and relaunched to great success and critical acclaim. But despite its very limited run, Battlestar Galactica, the original TV show, has still remained a firm fan favourite and has always managed to maintain a pretty strong cult following. And in many ways, the show is quite similar to Star Trek in that it seems perfect for any toy line. So I think there was a great deal of anticipation amongst fans when this line was announced from Bif Bang Pow. And so today I'm going to give a brief overview of the entire line, and I'm going to take a look at some of the ones in my own collection. So as ever, I'll start by looking at the packaging for these figures. As we can see, this is obviously very clearly inspired by the Mego style. It is essentially a flat card with a plastic bubble holding the figure. And as we can see, there is a nice illustration of a Cylon on the right hand side and some stars behind him, and I think this looks really nice. We have the Battlestar Galactica logo and we have the name of the character beneath, all in the correct font, and I think this looks really nice actually. I think this is quite presentable and definitely in keeping with the spirit of the show. And I'm pleased to say that this continues onto the reverse of the card as well, where we have a cool space scene here. We have some of the Vipers in action, which is really nice to see, and then we have some of the other action figures in this line, and obviously these are actual production headshots from the show itself, so this looks really cool, and there's a nice little bit of information describing the TV show, the premise for Battlestar Galactica on the right hand side there. So I think all in all, this is very nice. This is quite nicely done. It's very retro in style, definitely harks back to the style of figures that we saw in the 1970s, and it's nice in keeping if you want to put this next to, say, some of your Star Trek figures from that time. But all in all, it stands up very nicely on its own merits, and I think is very nicely designed. So starting off with the Cylon figure. This is probably the one I was most anticipating, the one I was most looking forward to, because I've always loved the Cylons. I've always thought the design was really cool and very interesting. And at first glance, it does look like it's captured the essence of the character. They look very cool, the design is very nice, and it looks very authentic to what we see on screen. I think they've done a very nice job when it comes to this sculpt. I think it's very faithful. I think they've done a nice job. I particularly like how they've tried to create that chrome effect on the armour. Now, it's not on their head sculpt, but it is on the body armour that goes around the torso, so that looks nice and bright. It catches the light very, very well, and it's nice that they've also managed to paint in the red eyepiece that zigzags across the visor. So all in all, this is good stuff. When we look at the side of the sculpt as well, we can see that the shape and size of the helmet is pretty accurate, and they've gone to the extra mile there, making sure they've shaded it in correctly at the back of the head, and I think this looks really good. So all in all, in terms of its overall presentation, I think this figure looks really, really good. As I mentioned, one of the key highlights to me is the fact that they've given this chrome plating. I think it's a really nice touch. The toy companies are very reluctant to do that these days, generally because A, it's expensive to do, and B, because it tends to chip away and dull over time, which it can leave with frustrated fans, which I can completely understand. But I still think it's a really nice touch when they do it. Usually, like I said, they would normally go for a matte paint job, so it's really good to see that here, and I think it works a treat because it really catches the light very, very nicely, and you can see your reflection in it, and I think they've done a very good job of this. And that continues all the way to the back as well. The sculpting is very, very good, but we also have some little bit of extra colour in some of those bleeping buttons that we can see on the backpack there. So I think this is very nicely sculpted, and like I said, the chrome in particular is a real winner. You may notice that the chrome armbands are actually a separate piece, so they can slide up and down the arm, and you'll also notice that the gauntlet has multiple colours. We've got the black bands at the top there, we have the chrome for the wrist piece, and of course we have the red and the orange buttons there, so that's quite nicely done. And on the reverse of the figure, we have this sort of flannel piece of the tunic that comes down the back. But I think they've done a very nice job of it. It's got sequins in it, so again, it catches the light very, very nicely. And I think it's been well executed. And then finally, for the legs, you'll notice that the top part is a sort of faux leather, a very thin faux leather material that kind of covers the thighs, whilst from the knee down, it is this one solid plastic boot. But again, we can see the top there, the kneecaps, of course, are in a chrome paint, while the rest of it is that matte black. So I think, again, a lot of attention to detail here, nice effort overall in terms of the presentation. So how does he fare in terms of articulation? Well, I'm afraid to say this is where the figure really falls down quite hard. So he does have a swivel at the neck, so he can spin his head from side to side. It's a little bit stiff at first because, of course, there is a little bit of resistance from that collar piece, but he can still turn his head 360 degrees if you want him to. The problems really start in the shoulders though, because he does have the usual elastic band articulation inside, where the arms are held together with elastic bands in the interior of the torso, but unfortunately because of this armour he can't really get his arms up at all. The armour piece, that shoulder pad there, really properly stops any articulation, so he can just about wobble his arm, but he can't really lift it up. And whilst there is a little bit of wiggle room to be able to move his arm forwards and backwards a fairly good distance, because of that shoulder piece it can't really hold itself in place, so it always snaps back to default, which is dead centre. This is a little bit redundant and really hurts the figure quite a lot in terms of being able to put him in any kind of pose at all, really. Now, he does have a single joint at the elbow, but again, the gauntlets really do hinder this quite a lot, so there's not a great deal of articulation here. But he does have a ball joint in the wrist, so his wrist can rotate 360 degrees no problem, and it also hinges so it can lift up and down very, very easily. But sadly, once again, whilst there is a swivel at the waist, we can't really get the most out of this because that armour there really stops it from moving. Unfortunately, the hips, the legs do not fare much better than the arms. Again, there's only really wobble room, so they kind of move about from side to side and forwards and backwards, but not a great deal, not enough to be able to do anything meaningful with. There is a single joint in the knee, which bends to 90 degrees, which is nice, but again, those boots are a firm plastic piece, and I'm afraid that there is no articulation in the foot as a result. On the bright side though, he does come with some cool accessories. He has his blaster and his sword. The blaster is fairly nicely sculpted, there's a little bit of detail in there and a little bit of colour, which is pretty good, and he's just about able to hold it in his very firm grasp, because there's not a lot of give in these hands, but he can just about hold it. It does look a little bit silly, but nevertheless, at least he can grip it, so that's something. Likewise, he is able to grip his sword, and I think this fits in his grip a lot better than the blaster does. It's a lot slimmer, the handle there, the hilt, so it fits in a lot more snugly. It still looks a little bit off, it doesn't look quite like he's grasping it properly, and it is still a bit of an effort to get it into his grip. So overall, I have some very mixed feelings about this Cylon. I think it looks really nice. Aesthetically, I give it top marks because I think they've done a fantastic job. It was essentially a Mego style figure. They've done an awful lot with this in terms of it looking very authentic. It's really nice to have the chrome effect on the armour plating, and I think visually it looks really good, but it's really let down by the fact that you can't really do very much with it. You can't pose it at all. It's pretty much going to stay in this one pose, and it does look a little bit silly with the accessories. So it's a kind of tricky one to judge, because on the one hand I really love the presentation, on the other hand I find it very disappointing that you can't do anything with him. Next up we have Starbuck. Now, much like the Cylon, I think first impressions when you get him out of the packaging is that actually this is a really nice presentation. The aesthetic is very authentic to what we see on screen, and I'd go as far as to say it's actually surprisingly good for this scale and this style of figure. Now, you may notice that he's a little bit stooped. Don't worry, I will touch on that a bit later. But first off, in terms of the sculpting, I think they've done a really nice job. And in fact, I think they've done an excellent job of the paint applications as well, because there's actually a number of different washes running through the hair to catch those blonde highlights, which is really well done. And I think the paint apps in the eyes and on the lips are really nicely applied. It looks very natural and looks pretty good. And as we can see here, I think they've actually done a pretty decent job with this sculpt, considering the scale and of course the very toyetic nature of this style of figure. I think they've done a pretty nice job of capturing the likeness of Dirk Benedict. They've done a very nice job of the presentation of the costume as well. So his jacket is removable. You can see it has the tank top underneath, so it is a separate piece, which is nice. And it's a nice sort of felt material as well. And it's nice that they've gone to the trouble of putting those buttons on there, making sure they've painted them accurately. I think that looks really good. And then we have some extra detail on the shoulder, so we can see that insignia that has been stuck on as a separate sort of transfer, which looks pretty good. I think they've done a nice job of this. It looks accurate and to scale. And you can see at the top of the jacket jacket as well. There are these shoulder pads as well, which are a different colour. Again, nice attention to detail there. And they've also provided him with a working holster as well. So again, this is made of a sort of flimsy faux leather material, but it works very well and it looks pretty good. And finally, his pants managed to tuck into his boots, which looks pretty sharp actually. It works surprisingly well. And the boots are made of a sort of firm plastic, sort of rubber piece that they can slide into. So the presentation of this looks really good. However, underneath you can see there is this seam running through the sole of the plastic, which creates a sort of wobble effect. So when you try and stand the figure freely, he's always going to fall over. So that's why he was a little bit stooped on the turntable. And sadly, it does mean that he's going to need extra support if you want to put him on display. Now, the articulation scheme will be very familiar to anyone who's ever owned any Mego figure or Bif Bang Pow figure in this scale previously. He has a swivel at the head. He's got the, I would say, ball-jointed shoulders, but of course they're held together with rubber bands in the interior of the torso, so they can pop out a little bit and give a lot of room for mobility there, which is pretty cool. He's got a single-jointed elbow, and of course he's got that pin swivel at the wrist as well. So again, that wrist will spin 360 degrees, and it will also hinge the hand forwards and backwards, which is great. There is that ball joint in the waist, so of course he can spin from side to side and wobble forwards and backwards a little bit, which is great. And he's got the bands in the hips, which allow his legs to kick out a little bit and kick forwards and backwards a fair distance as well, which is supported of course by the single jointed knee. And once again, no foot articulation because of the plastic boot. He also comes with a few accessories, including his helmet and his blaster. Now, I have to say, both of these are very nicely sculpted, but also very well painted. I mean, just look at the helmet. This is very authentic to what we see on screen, but very nice to see the black and that gold on the eagle at the very top. I think that looks really, really good. And likewise, his blaster has the white and the red as well as the black, and I think this looks really cool. And they work very well with the figure, which is fantastic. So he holds his blaster, it looks great, it fits in his hand very nicely there, and it looks pretty good, so this is top marks. Also, the helmet fits onto his head really, really well. It looks like it does in the show, and it looks pretty cool. So I have to say, all in all, the presentation of this figure is pretty fantastic, and he doesn't have any of the articulation problems that the Cylon did. So I think they've done a very good job with this figure. And this leads me now to Adama. And once again, the presentation of this figure is very, very nicely done. It's quite striking, and of course, in terms of the collection on the shelf, really nice to see the contrast between these three figures. And just like Starbuck, I think the head sculpt is very well done. You can see the attention to detail in the face, the paint apps are very nicely done, and I think this is a really good likeness. So I think they've done a very good job with this, especially at this scale. Once again, the tailoring is very nicely done. There's a lot of love and care and attention gone into this costume. The material is made of a sort of a felt sort of cotton kind of material, so it feels quite nice to touch. It catches the light very nicely as well, so it really shows off that royal blue, which is very impressive. And I really like that they've added that extra texture there of having the jewel at the top and of course the belt round his waist. These are separate pieces and they look really good. And I think they've done a nice job of the cape, which is a separate piece, so you can remove it if you want, but it's nicely done. It has that blue felt on the outside, on the inside it is just white cotton, but it looks pretty good, it's nice and flexible, and I think overall, yeah, they've done a nice job of this. And I'm also pleased that they've given different style boots. Again, this is in keeping with what we see on screen, so it's nice they've gone to the trouble of creating some different boots for him, and again his feet just slide into these, so it looks pretty good. The costume fits together quite nicely and looks pretty solid. The articulation scheme is exactly the same as Starbuck, so I won't run through it again. In terms of accessories, he only comes with one, which is this goblet, and I have to say it's probably not the most striking or impressive piece that I've ever seen, to be honest. It is one solid block, so it does look a bit clumsy and a little bit toyetic, I suppose, but nevertheless it is nice that it comes with an extra anyway, and it fits very nicely into his grasp, which is pretty cool. But of course, these weren't the only figures that were released as part of the initial line. We also had an Apollo, of course, and this figure, as you can see, is very similar to what we saw with Starbuck. The only real difference here, of course, is the head sculpt, as it is a different actor, different head sculpt, different likeness, but otherwise, this looks to be pretty much the same figure. They also released an additional 2 Cylons. They did the Cylon Commander, which is in this nice gold. It isn't the chrome effect, so it is like a matte paint job they've done here. And they also released a battle damage version of the Cylon, which for all intents and purposes is the exact same Cylon. It just doesn't have the chrome, so instead it's a little bit, got more of a black paint wash running through it, so it looks a little bit more dirty, a bit more rusted up. But that basically is the only difference. Now, this was basically the initial first wave, and for the longest time I thought these were the only figures they actually produced. They're certainly the only ones that I ever saw in hand. However, they actually did make, or at least made, prototypes of a few additional figures in this line. It actually expanded by quite a lot. And here we can see they made an Athena and also a Lucifer figure, which is pretty interesting. And you can see they're obviously very clearly expanding this line. And you can see the cards there. We can see these extra characters in the bubbles as well, which is fantastic. I believe these figures actually did make it into production, but were very limited in number. Likewise, they also seem to make this exclusive lunchbox set as well, which had an additional 3 figures in there, which looks pretty cool. Quite interesting choices. But I have to say, I absolutely love the lunchbox artwork. I think that looks absolutely fantastic. I've always been a sucker for artwork like that, but I think it looks really evocative and very, very cool. As for the figures themselves, it's very hard to judge from a handful of photos that I've seen online. I have mixed feelings. I don't know how I feel about them, in truth. The dagger looks to be off scale, doesn't look to be quite accurate, but again, very difficult to say from here. It looks a little bit ropey, I have to say, but I do definitely commend them for trying this, because this is something that's very, very different for this scale and this type of figure. So I think they deserve credit for that, at least. Likewise, Boxy's quite interesting because it's kind of difficult to do a child in this scale, so again, props for trying that. I'm not convinced from this photo by the head sculpt. It looks a little bit too large for the body, but again, very difficult to judge from photos without having them in hand, so just first impressions really. But again, all of these very unusual choices, and I think, quite ambitious really. So I believe that all of these figures actually made it into production, although some of them were much more limited than others. I think that's the case, and we can see that that's sort of verified by the back of this card here, which is an updated card later on, where we can see all the characters that we've looked at so far. So these are all proper production images, and obviously were either properly released or ready to go. But that's not the end of the story, because at SDCC 2013, some more prototypes were seen in the display booth. So we have a Boomer and a Baltar figure. Obviously, this is just a prototype image, so the final product may have varied somewhat, but going based off this, I think the Boomer figure looks pretty good. The head sculpt looks very nice, and of course, we know what to expect from the rest of the figure based on what we've seen with Starbuck. But I think it's the Baltar that's the more significant, because of course this is a brand new costume, obviously a brand new head sculpt, and this looks pretty cool. I think this would have been quite interesting to see in hand. The head sculpt looked to be a little bit too big for the body, but again, this is a prototype, so they may have fixed that by the time it came out into production. But that's not all, because they also produced a prototype of the Ovian as well. This looks pretty cool, quite exciting to have a proper alien in the collection. It looks like they've done a pretty nice job of it. It would have been pretty nice to have this made and actually have it in the collection, because of course he does look so different to anything else in the line. He's very distinctive, and that's always fun when you can shake up a line like this. But he wasn't alone, because there was also a Colonel Ty. Now I think we can see that they've rushed this into production, because he does seem to be wearing the exact same costume as Adama, and that's not quite accurate to what we see on the show. So again, pretty sure this is just a prototype and that we shouldn't take it too literally, as this is what we would have ended up with in hand. But nice to see that this is what they're thinking of doing, and it would have been, again, very cool to have that full complement, the full crew. And then finally, tucked away behind Lucifer here, we can see the Imperious Leader. And we can see a little bit more detail, although the photo's a bit more blurry over here. Very difficult to tell or make any kind of assessment with this one, so I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions based on these photos. And there you have it. As far as I know, there were no other figures either released or prototyped, but all in all, a pretty mixed bag. Definitely a line that's filled with highs and lows. I think aesthetically this line looks really, really good, at least for the main stars, the main characters that we're most familiar with. I think the costumes are nicely done, the presentation, the likenesses, all top notch. The articulation definitely suffers with the Cylon. That really lets the side down, which is a shame because it's such a great figure otherwise. But it is really pleasing to know that other figures were produced and that there were plans to really expand this line out. So if you are a fan, then I think you'd be very keen to get your hands on these. They're pretty fun, and in the main, they're pretty authentic to what we see on screen. And if nothing else, they look pretty cool on display. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.